Hello world, welcome to the Game Dev Vlog. My name's Raxter, and this is a glossary. Basically, I came across a term the other day I didn't recognize, and of course, I looked it up. I pretty soon realized there are a lot of terms that I don't know, and some that I've heard, but I just never really defined one in my head. So this show is just a bunch of terms that I'm going to define. So I'm just going to hit them with you rapid fire-ish style. First off, plate spinning games. This was the one that I had not heard originally. And it's used to describe a game where there's a lot of different tasks going on at the same time, and then you have to maintain each one of them, sort of switching between tasks to make sure they don't fall apart. You usually see this in like restaurant management games where you have a bunch of customers and you have to build up their custom orders before they get impatient. It's also seen a lot in games about spinning plates. Apparently that's a thing. Cool. Pause-based games. This is a term I think was defined by Total Biscuit in his WTF is the Last Federation video, which I'll put a link up to here. It basically describes continuous gameplay but with frequent or periodic pauses. So a turn-based game like Civilization or chess even takes place in discrete steps. So you'll have your whatever turn, and then you'll make a decision, and then next turn you make a decision, so on. And a real-time game is defined as continuous, so you'll be constantly playing like a real-time strategy or a first-person shooter. A pause-based game is a continuous game with pauses. So by that I mean a game that will run continuously but then stop, and then allow you to make decisions, and then it will run along and then pause again. The continuous bits can be controlled by the user or not. It depends exactly how you want to define it. Examples of this are games like Frozen Synapse. Transistor has pause-based mechanics. I think even with Fallout 3 combat mechanics, you can consider pause-based. It's a concept that's been around for a while, but I think this is a nice term that sort of unifies all of them, so I'm going to use it anyway. Monetization. Most people know what monetization means. It's basically the business plan of any game. So there are various different types of monetization models. There's premium, which is like, your normal upfront payment. Premium with DLC, they're subscription based. There's the infamous free to play. And even then, is it free to play with ad revenue? Is it free to play with in-app purchases? Basically, how a game developer is going to earn their money back from all the time they put in making the game. Speaking of free to play, whales. A whale is a certain person who will play a free to play game who will spend a lot of money on that game. I'm talking like hundreds of dollars, sort of level for, say, a game that you would think would cost $2 to $3. They effectively cover the spending of, up to a couple hundred players, which is why they're called whales. They're the big whales while everyone else plays for free. Usually they make up like less than 1% of the market, and it's a term that's usually used in mobile games, but it can be used in pretty much any free-to-play game, I think. The type of free-to-play games that you'll see whales in are usually the really large ones where there's a lot of content for the whales to buy. Smaller companies simply can't afford to create all that content for free. So you only really see large companies kind of doing this sort of strategy. Just a word of warning, kids. If you're designing a game, please don't monetize whales. If you want that game to be fun, if you want that to be a truly good game, don't monetize whales. Basically, targeting whales means that you're designing your game for less than 1% of people who will play it. The other 99% will probably not find those designs very interesting. Kingmaker. In multiplayer games, a kingmaker is somebody who has no chance of winning, but can determine who will win. Hence, they are the people who can make the king. If you've ever played Risk with more than 3 players, you've probably seen this, where your objective to, say, take Europe is impossible. So you, instead of trying to win, then gang up on another player to try, choose who you want to win. Sandbagging. This is a term that I only recently came across. It basically means to deliberately play with a lower ability than you're actually capable of. Usually this is done to fool your opponent into a sort of sense of complacency, and then you can take advantage of that complacency a bit later, or to maybe affect ranking so that your later matches will be easier. In arcade racing games you can see this. Usually the player that's in first is at a bit of a disadvantage because the weapons that they have can't shoot anyone because you're ahead of everyone. So what will happen is that the first player could actually allow the person in second to overtake them so that they can then use their weapons on them. Turtling. Turtling is used in strategy games a lot to describe a very defensive play where you just sort of go into your shell and defend with very little offense. It can also be used in action games as a term to describe very defensive play and then waiting for an opportunity to strike rather than just going on an all-out attack, for instance. This is very similar to, but not the same as, camping. Everyone knows what camping is, and they usually find it quite irritating. I wouldn't say turtling and camping are the same thing. Turtling is usually used to describe a defensive strategy of some sort, or a defensive stance, where camping is finding an advantageous spot and doing a repetitive, easy to perform task in order to win or gain an advantage. So turtling is like taking cover, whereas camping is, sitting in a corner waiting at the door and shooting anything that comes along. Speaking of which, cheesy gameplay. This one's actually a whole topic in of itself, and one I'd like to do a whole show on. It's not really terribly well defined, at least it wasn't for me. So I'll set it up like this. Most games have low-level gameplay. They're sort of running around, shooting, selecting things, moving from A to B, that sort of stuff. Very low-level interactions. And from these low-level interactions usually comes high-level gameplay. Tactics, guessing what your opponent's going to do, what plan of action, what path you're going to take, all those sort of things that are arguably the more interesting parts of the games. Though some games, low-level tactics are the more interesting parts, but let's say it's not. Cheesy gameplay, I'll say, is an easy-to-perform, low-level tactic with very little high-level consideration. And this is probably why people find it so annoying, is because it is very low-level play, and all that interesting stuff about the game that you love is just disregarded. So sitting in a corner in a first-person shooter game with your target on the door, waiting for somebody to come through, can be considered quite cheesy because there's no real high-level tactics coming into play there, and it's really easy to do. Sniping, I think, used to be considered quite cheesy in a lot of games, but recently is less so because it's become an actual really difficult skill to perform, and then people appreciate that, so they don't really call it cheesy. In a strategy game, for instance, a really super early rush can be considered cheesy because it doesn't really give your opponent any time to react and build all those strategies, and metagame doesn't come into play at all. This obviously opens up the debate that if cheesy gameplay is effective, then really what's the problem? If you win, it's fine. And for a lot of competitive games, that's really true. But it's often not that fun. So it's usually up to the game designer to identify cheesy gameplay elements and decide whether that's actually helping the game or really making it not so fun. I'm going to stop on that now because this is a topic I could talk about all day, and I actually want to do a whole episode on it. So I'm going to end on that note. I hope you all found this interesting. I certainly did. It was very fun looking up all these terms and really kind of understanding it and explaining it to you guys. So please feel free to leave a comment if I missed anything, maybe misunderstood something, or like this whole show is just about me learning stuff and hopefully you learning along as well. I'll probably do more glossaries in the future. I quite enjoyed this. It's nice learning new words, especially if they're game-related jargon. It's pretty fun. So subscribe if you want to keep up to date. There'll be more episodes. I'm going to try doing an episode once every 2 weeks. Leave a like if you liked it, and thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time. Cheers.